There is a strange paradox at the heart of modern life. Never before have human beings been so protected, so connected, so informed, and yet so quietly, persistently unhappy. Imagine a room with no sharp edges. The temperature is always perfect. The lights never flicker. Food arrives without effort. Entertainment flows endlessly. Nothing is demanded. Nothing threatens. And yet, after some time, the people inside begin to feel restless, irritated, dull. Something unnamed aches beneath. The comfort. This is not a dystopian fantasy. It is a metaphor for our age that we have mistaken comfort for fulfillment, safety for meaning, ease for peace, and in doing so, we have unknowingly cultivated psychological habits that drain the color from our days. One of the most subtle is our devotion to convenience. The modern mind has been trained to avoid friction at all costs, to eliminate waiting, uncertainty, discomfort, and effort. We optimize routes, automate tasks, smooth every rough edge of experience. But life, like a river, needs stones to sing. Without resistance, there is no music. Think of a muscle that is never strained. It does not grow strong. It weakens. Or a heart that never risks breaking. It does not deepen. It shrinks. Discomfort is not the enemy we imagine it to be. It is often the messenger. Boredom whispers that our lives have become too small. Anxiety signals that we are gripping too tightly. Sadness asks us to listen more carefully. But instead of listening, we numb, scroll, distract, replace sensation with stimulation. And so the paradox deepens. The more we chase comfort, the less at home we feel in ourselves. Another habit follows closely behind our obsession with happiness itself. We pursue happiness as if it were a permanent state, a destination one can finally arrive at and unpack forever. But happiness is not a place. It is weather. It passes. It changes. It was never meant to be owned. When we demand constant happiness, ordinary emotions begin to feel like failures. A quiet day becomes unproductive. A melancholy mood becomes a problem to solve. We pathologize the natural ebb and flow of the inner world. Yet wisdom traditions across centuries have whispered the same truth. Peace is not found in eliminating pain, but in allowing life to move through us without resistance. The modern psyche, however, has been taught to tighten, to fix, optimize, upgrade. We upgrade phones, careers, bodies, relationships, always reaching for a future version of ourselves that will finally be satisfied. But satisfaction postponed is satisfaction denied. In chasing a better tomorrow, we abandon the only place life has ever existed, now, and so a quiet unhappiness takes root, not dramatic despair, but a low-grade ache, a sense that something essential is missing, even when everything appears to be in place. This is how comfort suffocates us. Not violently, gently, with soft pillows and glowing screens and endless reassurance that everything is fine. Until one day, we wake up tired of being comfortable and unsure how to feel alive again. Part 2. If comfort is the soft cage, the self has become its most devoted guard. Modern unhappiness is deeply tied to a strange obsession. The idea that we must constantly construct, protect, and improve a personal identity. We are told explicitly and subtly that we are projects, brands, narratives in need of curation. Who are you? What do you do? What makes you special? These questions sound innocent, even empowering, but they carry a hidden weight. They suggest that you must always be something defined, legible, impressive. And so we turn inward relentlessly. We analyze ourselves, judge ourselves, measure our worth against invisible standards. The self becomes both the stage and the spotlight. Life transforms into a performance with no intermission. The irony is cruel. The more we focus on ourselves, the more anxious we become. Why? Because the self, when isolated, is fragile. It must be defended, validated, reassured, and in a world of constant comparison and exposure, reassurance is never enough. Think of a mirror placed in front of another mirror. The reflections multiply endlessly, but none are real. This is what happens when awareness folds in on itself without rest. Self-consciousness spirals. Joy evaporates. The sages spoke of this long ago. They warned that the self is not a solid thing, but a process, a wave mistaken for a permanent form. When we cling to it, we suffer. When we soften our grip, something Spacious emerges, yet modern culture urges the opposite. Build your identity. Protect your boundaries. Assert your narrative. Be seen. Be known. Be recognized. But notice how exhausting this becomes. How heavy it feels to constantly ask, how am I doing? How am I perceived? Am I enough yet? The happiest moments in life rarely involve this question. They happen when the self temporarily dissolves during laughter, love, deep work, creativity, or awe. In these moments, there is no observer keeping score. There is only presence, and still, we return to self-surveillance. We turn experiences into content, feelings into data. Even healing becomes another achievement to unlock. This habit quietly erodes our capacity for peace, because the self, by nature, is never complete. It always wants more security, more certainty, more affirmation. Freedom begins not by perfecting the self, but by loosening its grip on the center of our lives. You are not meant to be your own main character all the time. Sometimes you are meant to disappear into the moment and let life speak without narration. Part 3. Another root of modern unhappiness hides beneath a noble word, control. We praise control. We associate it with maturity, competence, success. To be in control is to be safe, or so we believe. But control, when taken too far, becomes a silent tyrant. The modern mind is trained to anticipate, predict, and manage outcomes. We plan relentlessly. We forecast emotions. We rehearse conversations that never happen. We attempt to pre-solve life, as if uncertainty were a flaw rather than the very texture of existence. This creates a peculiar tension, a constant readiness for things to go wrong. Even in moments of calm, the body remains braced, the jaw tightens, the breath shortens, the nervous system stays alert, scanning for threats. Anxiety thrives here, not because danger is present, but because control is impossible. Life, like the ocean, cannot be commanded. You can learn to sail, you cannot still the waves. And yet we try. We cling to routines, identities, expectations, believing they will protect us from loss. But the tighter we grip, the more painful the inevitable slipping becomes. Consider how often suffering arises not from what happens, but from our refusal to accept that it has happened. The mind says, this should not be. Reality says, it already is. Between these two, friction burns. Control also distorts our relationship with time. We rush the present in service of a future that never quite arrives. Even joy becomes provisional, something to be enjoyed later, once conditions are perfect. But perfection is a mirage. Each time we reach it, it dissolves into new demands. The sages understood this deeply. They spoke of surrender not as weakness, but as alignment. To surrender is not to give up action, but to release the illusion that we are the sole authors of the story. When control softens, trust emerges, not blind optimism, but a quiet confidence that life can be met as it unfolds. This does not eliminate fear. It changes our relationship with it. Fear becomes a signal, not a commander, a wave to ride, not a verdict. Modern unhappiness often stems from living as if life were a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be lived. The moment we stop demanding guarantees, something unexpected happens. We breathe. As control tightens and the self grows louder, another habit quietly slips into the center of modern life: comparison. Not the occasional glance outward, but comparison as a way of breathing. We wake up and measure. We scroll and measure. We succeed and still measure. The modern world has turned comparison into a background hum, always on, rarely noticed, constantly shaping how we feel about our own lives. We compare our beginnings to other people's middles, our private doubts to their curated victories, our raw, unfinished selves to their polished surfaces. And then we wonder why joy feels so fragile. Comparison distorts reality because it removes context. You never see the full landscape of another human being, their fears at night, their compromises, the invisible costs of their achievements. You see a single angle, lit just right, and your mind fills in the rest with fantasy. This fantasy becomes a quiet accusation. You are behind. Behind where? According to whom? By what measure? The tragedy is not that we admire others. Admiration can inspire. The tragedy is that we use others as evidence against ourselves. Comparison also turns life into a race with no finish line, no matter how far you go. Someone else appears ahead, and even when you are ahead, the fear of being overtaken poisons the view. The sages warn that envy is not simply wanting what another has, it is forgetting what you already are. It is the mind's refusal to rest in its own path. Every life unfolds according to rhythms that cannot be compared without violence. A tree does not envy another tree's height. A river does not resent the ocean. Each moves according to its nature. But modern culture teaches us to live as if worth were scarce, as if someone else's success diminishes our own, as if life were a single ladder instead of an endless field of different directions. This habit creates chronic dissatisfaction. Even gratitude becomes conditional. Even peace feels temporary. The antidote is not isolation from others, but a return to inward orientation, not the obsessive self-focus of ego, but a quiet attunement to one's own unfolding. When comparison loosens, something surprising emerges: relief. The relief of not having to win at being human. And in that relief, joy finds room to breathe again. Beneath comfort, self-obsession, control, and comparison lies a deeper fear, one rarely named aloud: the fear of emptiness. Modern life is exquisitely designed to help us avoid stillness. Noise fills every gap. Notifications punctuate silence. Productivity disguises restlessness. Even leisure is optimized, scheduled, shared. We are rarely alone with ourselves without mediation. Why? Because stillness reveals what distraction conceals. In silence, unresolved questions surface. Grief speaks. Longing stretches its limbs. The ache of impermanence becomes audible, and so we keep moving, not always toward something meaningful, but away from something uncomfortable. Busyness becomes a shield. Stimulation becomes a sedative. But emptiness is not the enemy we imagine. It is the soil from which clarity grows. The sages sat in silence not because they had nothing to say, but because they knew that wisdom cannot be heard over constant noise. Stillness is not absence, it is presence without clutter. When we avoid emptiness, we also avoid depth. Love becomes thin. Creativity dries up. Meaning feels distant. Life flattens into a series of tasks and entertainments, efficient but hollow. There's a particular modern sadness that comes from being perpetually occupied, yet inwardly untouched. Many feel it, but cannot name it. A sense of floating above one's own life. Emptiness, when allowed, does something radical. It reconnects us to being rather than doing. It reminds us that we exist even when we are not producing, achieving, or proving anything. This can feel terrifying at first. The mind resists. It demands distraction. But if we stay, if we do not immediately fill the space, something shifts. What felt like a void reveals itself as spaciousness. And in that space, we encounter ourselves not as projects, but as living presences. At the heart of all these habits, comfort-seeking, self-fixation, control, comparison, and avoidance of emptiness, there is one final thread: resistance to letting go. We resist change. We resist loss. We resist endings. And yet life is movement. Breath in, breath out. Rival, departure, growth, decay. To resist this rhythm is to live in constant friction with reality. Much of modern unhappiness comes from wanting permanence in a world defined by impermanence. We want relationships without vulnerability, success without uncertainty, pleasure without loss. But the sages remind us, what you cling to becomes heavy. What you allow can pass through. Letting go is not indifference. It is intimacy with life as it is, not as we wish it to be. It is the courage to love without guarantees, to act without total certainty, to live without armor. When we release our grip just slightly, we begin to feel a different kind of peace. Not the peace of control, but the peace of trust. Not the peace of numbness, but the peace of alignment. Life becomes less of a battle and more of a dance. You still feel pain. You still feel fear, but they move. They do not lodge permanently in the body. They do not define you. In the end, happiness was never something to be secured. It was something to be visited, like a passing breeze. Peace, however, is deeper. Peace arises when we stop arguing with the nature of things. And so the invitation is simple. Though not easy, soften where you have hardened. Listen where you have numbed. Release where you have clenched. Sit quietly, even for a moment. and feel the breath arrive without effort, leave without permission. Notice how life continues, even without your management. This is not resignation. This is awakening. And in that awakening, unhappiness loosens its grip, not because life becomes perfect, but because you finally stop demanding that it be.